you've had this amazing background in first off is academia, and you've been the director of clinical residency and additional background pursuing your doctorate of science. And before we get into what you've been doing as a producer as well as a artist, so to speak, I kind of wanted to get your perspective and what it was like working in the space of academia, and what was your overall interpretation of that?
Yeah, so I'm all but dissertation, so I didn't finish my PsyD. But yeah, so I went to Ithaca College. I loved Ithaca College. I still love it. So my great friends are still Ithacans. But even as a student in PT, I was a poor student, like really bad. I had just really poor auditory learning skills. And even in class, our textbooks are two dimensional, and they're telling us about how like the roll and slow and sliding glide of our GH joint. And I'm a very visual and kinesthetic learner, so I thrived in like labs, like in
Mm.
lab and practical, except for one that I failed. But I had a lot of trouble. Like I really had trouble staying like always at the point of being failed out all the time,
Mm.
except for until I got to gross anatomy. No pun intended. That's the name of the brand. But like then I thrived. I think it was just like the hands-on, the seeing, the problem solving, and finding things, and that made more sense. And so part of that was just my own kind of issues with like the way I learn. And so when I left, what I was so the reason I kind of came up with the idea of gross anatomy was like, well, this is all educational stuff. And even when I was in my clinicals, I was like, we don't use scalpels or heavy machines, like the equipment. We don't even need the Cybex machines. I was like, this has to be on TV, and that was kind of the quest.
Mm.
And so even teaching in academia, I just kind of felt like, why aren't our students doing things like practicing, putting this into practice, even in like an institution? There should be, it doesn't even have to be a faculty practice, but it could be just like every month on the 20th of the month, the nursing students come down to the PT department and they do an evaluation, or the faculty get evaluated by the students, like literally like a preventative medicine kind of model. And I was just like, are there like incentives to do it or not to do it? Like, why am I up here lecturing all the time? And then there was other things where I kind of felt like, the students were kind of, you know, oftentimes it was like, when they got in trouble is when you paid attention. And I just felt like the educational system just wasn't jiving with how I perceived, especially a very physical a profession, to be sitting in the classroom for an hour and listening to a lecture when they're
Yeah.
telling you should move and do bridges and do these manual therapy techniques. And it's like you're listening to a lecture for 90% of the time. And I think that was the issue with like why I struggled in school, was like because it was very little doing and a lot of listening, a lot of kind of sitting and doing nothing. And so when you're idle, guess what? We all know this. Um, and that's kind of academia. When I was in the front of the classroom, was like the same thing. I was like, you know what? Like, let me make this in a fun, different narrative way that I can educate not only students but the public. And like now, I'm kind of talking to people who are kind of interested in gross anatomy and going to education, but then there's public health, and it's like now I'm like I don't know where to go. So I'm not at
Right.
that point in this journey.
Yeah, and many different ways we can go about this, but certainly for myself, I've thought of that too, is where many of the problems in healthcare is people don't really know a lot, or not even, I shouldn't even put it like that. They just don't know what they don't know, right? Like you and me
Yeah.
can sit here and talk about the things where
Mhm.
people need to improve upon, and then we will go to a patient's house or we talk to them in the clinic and we say, hey, this is something that you really should be thinking about, and they're like, well, I've never thought about that. No one ever told me. And
Mhm.
so I think that's something, educating the public is definitely going to be something that we're going to have to do more and more as providers. But building off from just the ability to see, I guess, did when you had gross anatomy, was that kind of that aha moment of like, we got to make it more fun. It's boring. It's something we're not here. Something we're doing here isn't working.
It wasn't so much as the boring part. It was more so like I want to motivate people. So really, when I get to it, it's a behavioral change
Mm.
platform. So I said, if I can do a really cool one day, this is my dream. Like when I get to this point, it's like I'm retired, I'm done. Like the Mission Impossible Tom Cruise scene where he blows up onto the train. I was like, what if you can teach people how their body works by doing a cool scene from a pop culture thing? You might be motivated to go and work out, do it, or do your exercises, right? We
Yeah.
talk about non-compliance in physical therapy. And really, I think it's kind of like it's on us as clinicians to convince and get the buy-in.
Right.
That's kind of my belief. But I said, what if we created some beautifully designed Hollywood style, like like narratives and footage with some awesome 3D design and the education of what we do in the clinic and combine those two, people would kind of watch it like Sex in the City or Friends or, the Queen's Gambit. Queen's Gambit is an example I give. It's like it's a story, but it's about chess. Like you learn, I don't care about chess, but like my brother, who was a nationally ranked chess person in high school, he might be like, oh, it's kind of cool. And even if I had nothing to do with chess and I was interested in it, I might learn something and go further and like look it up. So those are the things where I like storytelling and evoking emotion. For me, it's humor first. And I'm working on a dramatic kind of piece right now, and I'm also working on like a musical that's more kind of like humorous but dramatic as well. Is that if you can evoke emotion, you'll get someone to maybe change a behavior or
Mm.
create a behavior that's positive.
And
So it's
when you
mostly behavior change.
Right, and when you're listing off all the different like shows and stuff, one of the original ones was Sesame Street. One of the
Hmm.
biggest things by the government they were trying to do is to get people and get kids to learn more. And by doing that, they created this show where they were trying to educate kids through the use of just characters and things like that.
Hmm.
But for adults and people who are generally just unaware, it would be great to have this opportunity to watch something like you said in show format to be like, hey, and by the way, that guy just punched him and he's having, getting punched with his metacarpals. I watched the one
Hmm. All
recently
right.
where you were fighting some guy and it was very, very entertaining. So you decided to make these amazing and entertaining pieces. I guess, where did you get this idea, or where did you get the curiosity to start producing yourself? It's kind of a left turn away from this whole anatomy, clinical, being a provider. Where did this curiosity like begin for you?
I remember my buddy started his own production company right after school. Like it was like 3 years after school, and I was like, "All right, I want to do this." And he told me how much it costs to make like a 1.5 minute video. It's like $700. I was like, and I had a ton of student loan debt. And I was like, we did one of them. There was like three. It was three little videos and a minute and a half. And I was like, I can't afford this. And that's when I kind of went the DIY route. And I found this organization in Brooklyn that was doing very affordable courses for adults. And then I just kind of YouTube and practice and doing my own stuff. That's what happened. But really, honestly, it was necessity. I couldn't hire film production company. Even my buddy, who was just a new graduate, I didn't realize how expensive it was to do film. I couldn't go back to film school because I had too much student loan debt already.
Yeah.
So I had no choice. If it was up to me and I came out like blazing guns with like high salary and no debt, yeah, I would have hired a production team to like create like content every like month or something. But it was a necessity, and I kind of appreciate it now because I understand how much things cost, how long it takes,
Hmm.
what's the capabilities, even the emerging technologies that we'll probably get into later. And I know how to do everything. So I can create content pretty quickly, pretty affordable, but I can also go very high up too. And I know
Hmm.
the capabilities of like what's advanced and what's coming out and what's here. And so in one part, I'm kind of grateful that I had to learn it the hard way. But it was like, so I'm like a perfect example of like, I have a doctorate in physical therapy. I went to academia, I learned, I did all that stuff. And I also have this, like, I went to YouTube University, taught myself. So if anybody can talk about like learning, it's probably me, as an example in
Right.
both cases.
Well, and it's usually self-learning where you really, and it's that self-interest, because we get told to go to school all the time, but we don't really get told to, hey, go start a
Hmm.
YouTube channel, start directing, start making videos, do all this stuff by yourself. You have to almost put yourself out there and be like, this is what I'm gonna do. This is, and regardless of what's gonna happen,
Hmm.
I'm gonna make sure this happens. And did you have any moments where you're like, I don't know about this. I don't know if this is gonna be something I should spend my time doing?
July 1st, 2021,
Hmm.
like a couple months ago. I went to bed and I said I quit. I woke up and I got a grant from New York City for $5,000. And that's why episode 5 came about.
Wow,
I'm not kidding you. And
that's
then
insane.
it happened even like just recently. I was about to quit again. Not even quit, just kind of like, but maybe I should rethink this. And then like I had like a couple investors interested. So it's just the weirdest thing. But oh yeah, many times I've had exes tell me I was confused, that I didn't know what I wanted. I was told by people that it wasn't possible. To this day, sometimes I get people who say, "Hey, it's really hard. You should pick one or the other." And like I told somebody, I just talked to somebody today. He was like, "No, you're like someone who's advanced in production." Was like, "No, you're onto something." He's like, "You're the future of kind of healthcare." And I was like, "Yeah, I thought that for about a decade." And I was
Yeah.
crying. I was like, "You're the second person in my whole life to tell me that." but most people are kind of like skeptical, and I have, yeah, like everybody, you have doubts. Even PT school, I almost quit PT school because I was failed out, or I couldn't afford it, or I was just like, maybe I'm not that smart. So I've hit that road many, many times, and even more so with gross anatomy. Obviously, it's just kind of like, who wants to combine video is different than film, right? Film and the narrative, and design and physical therapy, and it's hard. I mean, it's really, really hard, and there's been plenty of times I've wanted to quit, and I just can't. It's weird. It's like
I
a
don't think you
problem.
should, man, because I think you like the guy said, I think you are onto something. And I think it always starts with doubters, right? They're like, oh, I don't know,
Yeah.
man. Like it starts with doubt, and then all of a sudden it's like, how did you do that? How did what? And then all of a sudden it's like they start asking you questions. You're like, yeah, I remember when you were saying to pick one or the other. Now you're asking me all these questions. So I'm sure we're gonna see the other side of it.
Yeah, and that's kind of what's happening in LinkedIn. I got messages being like, "Hey, let's chat. What do you do? What is this? I'm very interested. You're doing something like." It's just kind of starting to come in. I think it was like 9 years of doubts, and then all of a sudden like be like, "Wait a minute, there's something here."
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well, like you said, if you gave yourself an education, I'm sure that's going to be priceless long term. But let's describe exactly what gross anatomy is. I mean, we've been kind of like dancing around the idea of what it is specifically, but let's just define it clearly and like what like the first like all these episodes that we're talking about are.
yeah. So gross anatomy, I call it healthcare entertainment, and it was just my way of combining, as you heard me talk earlier, is combining what television shows have and an education component with what we do as clinicians in the clinic. That was kind of the ultimate thing. However, so the grail was like create a sitcom type show, which is what you might see in the web series. But before that, I was doing short sketches, like little itty bitty 1 minute, 2 minute kind of sketches, and it may just be about the shoulder. You saw the Mission Impossible one, and it was kind of combining pop culture themes and then education, and either it's anatomy or how to treat a condition. For what we do in the clinic as physical therapists. But it's kind of expanded. Once I finished the production of those 5 episodes, I was like, I can do this. Like I was kind of like this like armor, and being like, oh, I can do it all, you know. And so now I've kind of expanded it in the past 6 months to be a narrative podcast, which is out. Episode 2 should be out any moment, to be honest. And then there's also a live theater show, which I did in 2016. That was like the first thing I did in New York City when I had started acting, took voice lessons, learned to sing, and I kind of did my own kind of take on a one man show, talking about patients and characters, and then putting music into an educational component to it, and so I'm actually kind of bringing that back, and it's inspired by a musical called Hedwig and the Angry Inch, which will go in person depending on COVID dependency, but in March. So it's pretty much every entertainment aspect that you can think of, and combining what we do in the clinic and teaching you how the human body works in an entertaining way, so that you can actually take care of yourself
Hmm.
more so, and have independence and not have to be reliant on going to the doctor's office, doing virtual meetings with physical therapists or anybody, So, and don't get me wrong, like I'm a clinician still. Like I
Yeah.
like seeing patients. But the point is that we can prevent a lot of conditions. And by the time they see us, or we're fine tuning things, or we're in a really, really significant kind of condition that we're dealing with. But I think we can reduce healthcare costs significantly. We can give people their lives back, and they can do a lot of stuff on their own using gravity, a band, and a TheraBand, and some dumbbells, and maybe an ankle weight or two,
Hmm.
and body weight. And so that was kind of the goal of what gross anatomy is. So, we call it kind of healthcare entertainment. That's starting to become a buzzword. But I'm trying to tackle almost every entertainment industry out there, and just interjecting what we teach people in the clinic. And that's what gross anatomy is and will be.
Well, I like that you're taking responsibility for it. One thing that we always harp on as PTs is make sure you do your exercises, and we almost place blame on the patient to do the exercises, which it is their responsibility. But I think also as providers, we have to make it one applicable to the patient, and we have to make it somewhat fun, or at least desirable, that the patient actually wants to do the exercises. Because if I was somebody who had no background in physical therapy, went to a PT clinic and they're like, do a clam, I'm like, I, I don't know. And I think with this, you're like putting a pause on it. You're stopping. You're like, how can I make this better and more entertaining for the patient? And have you seen maybe like increased compliance or maybe an increase in curiosity with your patients with exercise or a relationship with exercise at all?
Well, it's wild because I'm at the point where I'm like, I have to kind of get some data on this, and that's where like the education versus media part comes in. But usually it's like anecdotal. Like it's crazy. Like I think like 2 years ago, my uncle messaged me like, "Oh, I love your video." And he didn't really like, he like, liked it, and that was it. He didn't comment it. And then I was like, "Oh, I didn't realize you saw it." He's like, "Yeah, I watch all your videos." He's like, "It helped with my shoulder rotator cuff, tendonitis problems." I was like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Yeah, you video last year." And I was like, "Really?" And my other buddy that we used to dance, and he messaged me after during COVID. And he's like, "Yeah, hamstring problem, and your video helped me." And I was like, "Oh gosh." So I think like anecdotally, I'm getting that stuff, and through messaging and people telling me it was helpful. But now, like that's kind of the next step. Is kind of like kind of curating a lot of the stuff and seeing if there's actually outcomes, true outcomes. Um, and that's kind of what it is, because it was challenging to learn production. Now it's like it kind of be I have a system and it kind of comes out now.
Mhm.
Now it's like, all right, well, how do I monetize this, and also how do I show that the outcomes of it? And that's kind of like 2022 is like that's my goal. Yeah, I'm creating more content, but the content is kind of in my blood, and I'm getting collaborators here and there. But yeah, that's kind of something that's the next step, is to like really kind of look at, does this change behaviors? And I was just talking to somebody who told me about a show at which there's research done on. It's called Soul City. It's called,
Mm.
and I guess it's filmed in South Africa, and there's data showing that behavior changed as a result of that show.
Oh, okay.
There's data showing that even Grey's Anatomy things change. Where there's good and bad. Like I think somebody's almost like, after watching Grey's Anatomy, some people would expect them to be cured at the doctors. Like they had these
Yeah.
crazy high expectations because of the show. So those are things that as someone who, I'm a DPT residency, started my SCD, it got really far. I'm almost all the dissertations. I didn't start it. I actually got it through quite a bit. So research methods, right, and statistical analysis. Like, well, what kind of research study would mine be? Is it
Mhm.
really in the classroom and higher education? Is it the public? And that's kind of where I'm talking to some local organizations, trying to kind of partner up to see if we can use the content or curate some original content for them to give to their patients or their other community here. And that's kind of the what's happening. Quick story. So in the show, if you saw the web series, there's shorts, right? And there's like the Mission Impossibles. They're quick. Then there's a web series which is like kind of more of like a sitcom
Like
type
the
of
classroom
TV.
one and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, the classroom. And so like in the my parents went to Boricua College. It's a local university here in Manhattan. And in the show, I use the name Boricua University in the beginning. If you heard like the policy of Boricua University in Spanish, she said it. And so I did that for legal purposes, because some graduates of Ithaca College, they made the movie Road Trip, and they asked the college
Oh.
if they could use Ithaca College and the campus as film. They got denied, so they did Ithaca University and they used an Alabama campus. So I kind of did the same thing, and then this summer during the grant area I emailed the school and cold email, "Hey, I'd like to collaborate. Let me know if we can screen my thing on there at the university." No reply. I got an email 3 weeks ago from the assistant to the president being like, "We'd love to collaborate." And we talked on the phone. He's like, "You can use our name. We're gonna go through legal." He's like, "Come to campus and check it out." I was like, "So I'm going next Thursday." So it's just crazy how like, the eventually, so like that's a higher education place. So like there's an opportunity to kind of be like, "Hey, show this to your CNA courses,
Mm.
in your CNA courses or your nursing school programs, and see if it helps." And so that's actually what I think this year is going to be, is kind of creating a little bit more content where it's a little bit more organized, and then kind of giving it to some organization to study, or I'll just do it myself, kind of like just kind of take some data. But yes, to answer your question, is like there's no real actually data numbers, besides just anecdotal messages I can kind of screenshot. But that's the goal.
Yeah, and for listeners who may not understand the process, it's important to have data for everything, whether you're trying to see if a drug works or if you're trying to see, again, if gross anatomy is applicable and people are learning. And so when people, such as institutions, colleges and stuff, they see something new, they're interested, they want to have outcomes, and they want to see patients getting better. And that's probably henceforth the significance of this question and why data is so important in our realm. And for you, like what's the creative process like trying to get like different ideas? I'm sure. Do you get inspiration from movies? Do you get inspiration from just things that pop up in your head to try and create an idea to make things creative? I know it's, you got to break it down into, you got to keep in mind, making sure the anatomy is good and everything, but like, how do you think of a scenario to be like, this is going to be a good demonstration of what I'm trying to show?
Yeah, great question. So, so for example, yeah, I get inspired by everything. My patients inspire me, myself, things I go through throughout the day, my friends, my family, and then TV shows, movies, films, things I see and watch, and anything, situations on the subway. So, like for example, I have one that I'm working on right now. Have you seen the Netflix You?
Yeah. Yep.
You, so like the creepy stalker one.
Yeah, exactly.
And so what I do is I'm like, well, what's relatable to the public, right? So I'm a fan of You, and I think it was kind of crazy, and I think our generation kind of likes it. So I was like, oh, I could do. I was like thinking about, well, how could I do the cervical spine, which I haven't really done. And so I was like, oh, Joe Goldberg is creeping and can't turn his neck, and so he has either like a facet arthropathy or ridiculous or something like that. So pretty much he'll kind of be like, it'll be kind of silent, like there'll be voiceover. It's like, I'm looking at her as she walks down the and then go down and in pain, and I'll kind of go back, and it's like kind of creepy. I'm googling neck pain or something, and then I give you the answer. That's a condition one.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's an indication of like, here's the neck pain condition. I'll match the Joe Goldberg, and then like the girl, the actress at the end. I solve my neck issue. She catches me, and then she like kind of Mission Impossible. She kind of beats me up and kicks me in the nuts like 10 times at the end, and then end the scene, right? So that's kind of what I do, is I kind of take pop culture stuff, and I say, well, what kind of injury can I add to that, right? When you watch Netflix You, it's a lot of his like him like just looking with his hat on, and so I was like, oh, that's the upper kind of quarter thing. Okay, let me try the neck for that one, and I kind of see if it matches up, and then I kind of put on the director hat / the anatomy hat and the clinical hat, where it's like, well, can I shoot it like this? And can I overlay a muscle or the cervical spine if I turn and I have the shot like this? Then it becomes like the technology and the software and what I have available. And then I kind of write the script. And I just kind of give myself a reason to stalk and give her a reason to kick me in the junk. And then I find where I can put the anatomy parts, and then we go from there. There's another one like a Schmigadoon, right? So, Apple TV, Schmigadoon's like a spoof of musical theater. No. Anyway, so it's a musical theater spoof. And so I'm going to be kind of in like a hat and overalls and some dress pants, and I'll be bent over painting. Like I'm actually going to be like a Mexican painter, but painting like very low on the staircase because of the space. That's what I have available to me. And then also I'm kind of like, talking in an accent that I have a bad knee, and then just start singing like a beautiful Broadway, like just out of like nowhere. But the song teaches you what he did to fix his knee or SI joint. I'm still kind of like playing around which condition. Again, it has to do with the edit and the overlays and just even the story and the dancing. So it'll be like a dancing number and stuff like that. So that's where I kind of get inspiration from that. And then there's like a Spanish character called Cantinflas. Long time when I was a kid. It was even old when I was a kid. And it's kind of like the Charlie Chaplin. And so that's one in Spanish. I have one of my mom. My mom actually had like carpal tunnel symptoms, but it was really that she had significant tightness in her forearms. So it's compressing her median nerve from the more proximal. And she actually got surgical like consults, and they were going to cut her open. And I was like, well, it's not that. And she's like has a lot of tension. Her thoracic spine's super stiff, and finally, and she also sits with her arms crossed all the time. So the brachioradialis and the like all that was just kind of curled up.
Right.
And I was like, Mom, stop doing this. I call her out, and she stopped doing it. Massage her. She'd massage herself with a foam roller. Stretch out her hands, and she's sleeping better, and she doesn't feel it. So I was gonna make it kind of like a Latin grandmas get together and like with tea, and they're just yelling profanities and being ridiculous in Spanish. So that's a Spanish one. So those are kind of the things like that inspired me, because my mom actually had that situation. But then I kind of look at my mom and my aunt, and like her best friends interact, and it's just funny. And also bringing the culture into that, So that's kind of also an inspiration. It's like in my background, I'm biracial, I'm Hispanic, I grew up in Manhattan, among mostly Dominicans and Puerto Ricans, but I went to school at very rich prep schools with a lot of Jewish people and Christians. And so like, it's just kind of meshing a lot of these things together, because it's like, how can I relate to my audience the most? And maybe if I can relate to you, you might be more apt to doing your shoulder exercise. That's not an exercise, but if you're listening, I'm doing like a chicken
wing, yeah.
Like that. But those are kind of the things, and a lot of times, sometimes people say, "Oh, is that offensive?" I'm like, "Come on, like we'll watch some TV. Like everything's kind of offensive, and I'm okay making people feel uncomfortable because there is like an identity to us that it's okay. Like I don't mind kind of pushing those. Everything's mostly PG-13 to be honest, that I do, as if you haven't noticed, but."
Hmm.
I want to reflect kind of our community and who we serve as a clinician and also just as a human.
Right.
So those are kind of the things that I get inspiration from is actually, people around me, the people I see on television, on the screen or listen to. And I kind of do that. There's for example, there's one that I want to do that there'll be a little bit kind of higher budget. That's called Master Wong. So he's like a martial arts instructor. He's just hilarious. Like he's kind of where I got the like kicking in the nuts thing, but he's just, and he has a thick, uh, he speaks English. He's Asian descent, but he's from England. So he has this really thick accent you can barely like
Interesting.
hear, and he's bald and he's jacked and he's like really, he's just amazingly entertaining. And so I want to do a spoof on that. So I'll get a bald cap and makeup artist to do that. But that's something that's a channel I watch a lot because I do martial arts myself and I just like them. And so those are the things that like I just come across. I'm like, you know what? And it helps because I don't have to think that hard. So what I have to think about is, well, how do I recreate the narrative to fit with like a neck problem or a shoulder problem or an anatomy kind of or a condition. So that's the hard part. It was the hard part. Now it's much simpler, but it took me about a decade. Regardless of what I can use Premiere Pro, After Effects, or do VR, the hardest part was combining the story. That was the most challenging part. That I think only in the last year and a half it has clicked. I'm not there yet, but it's pretty close. But that was the hardest part. It was combining the narrative, the storytelling, and the characters and the situations with what we do in the clinic.
Well, it's great that you're including things that you're seeing and experiencing because not only are you now being educated through these entertaining skits and things like that, but you're also getting a part of you, the things that you see, the things that
Mm-hmm.
you find important. And
Yeah.
another thing is you're also viewing the world in the way that PTs kind of see the world, correct? One thing I always hear PT say, and even myself, is the second you graduate PT school, you watch people walk all the time, right? You watch people do the things that they
Mm-hmm.
do, and you just it's not even it's second nature. It's you just happen to
Yeah.
watch them walk. You're like, oh, they're doing this, not incorrect, but it's abnormal, right? And it's almost like through these skits, you're able to see through the lens of what a PT sees. It's like you're seeing the sternocleidomastoid, you're seeing the neck, you're seeing the abnormalities in the head turn,
Mm-hmm.
you're seeing many different things that what we see and we're like that's something that we can fix. Now you can see it and demonstrate it through these skits. And was that an intentional thing or did that kind of just come about as you started creating?
I mean, apparently it was not intentional because you're just opening my. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize it. Like
Yeah.
you just opened up my eyes to to that. I wouldn't think of that, but thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
you're right. 100% right. I never thought of that.
Well, yeah, and again, it's the hardest thing to do is to teach, right? We learn all these things in PT school,
Mm.
and going to talk to a patient, it's like we have these reasons as to why we say the things that we do, and we're like seeing these things, but it's hard to describe what we see. And that's why I think it was so interesting with these videos. It's like, man, you can really see what I'm seeing, kind of thing, and break it down in an entertaining way. So I think again, moving forward with this, you're going to continue to build more and more skits and stuff. Do you plan on making more of like just skits in general? Are you going to stick to skits? Are you going to move to movies? I guess what's the plan with that?
Yeah, well, actually, honestly, if anything entertainment, I'm probably gonna say yes. So, for example, yeah, so I have about five. Well, one is I have two animated things coming out, motion capture VR style, but it's animated, and then I'd say three animated things. One's hand drawn illustration, like based on well, it's not based on, but it's like so much of Dear Basketball by Kobe Bryant. So it's three animations. I have about four live action little sketches. I'm working on the web series 2.0, which is me in the clinic, and I got partnered up with an LA writer who's emerging, kind of, actually in Hollywood, not like me,
Yeah.
but he's actually in the writers' room with like sitcoms, and he's actually doing that for a living, and we're collaborating. He's helping me write. So that's coming out probably again March. March is gonna be a lot, but you're gonna see a lot of stuff. So that's that, and then I'm working on another dramatic piece. So the story kind of goes where it's kind of like a noir kind of short film where I'm like a janitor and I'm 37, but like 40s. And you just kind of watch him like struggling with his hip, like he has hip arthritis, he needs a hip replacement. And it's quiet, like all you see here is like just see me kind of struggling and like limping and moving my hip and weird, compensating right what we see. And part of that's to relate because people can relate. My mom had 3 hip replacements, and you couldn't tell today. And so just showing the struggle of when you have, or you're at the point where you need to have a surgery, which happens, and then sweeping, climbing ladder, doing all this stuff, and then he gets called into the boss's office, not even the boss's, like the owner's office of whatever corporation this is. And the boss is in a suit. There's happened to be like a colleague of his and in a suit too, but he's more of a translator. I get sat down, and they offer to pay for all the expenses. That's a brief, and so that's a more dramatic thing. And my character only speaks Spanish, immigrant kind of story, and so it's like it's a story kind of like, what if we did that to each other? Like if you had the means to pay for someone's rehab and surgery, and child, because I think we're putting child care in there as well, like then that would be pretty awesome, or what if healthcare was different? We have all these lofty ideas about it, but that's a short film. Like that's actually like a small short film that's more dramatic. There's really few lines, but it's just more of like an emotional kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's that. Then there's the musical, which we're in the process of finishing the development. The script should be ready next week, and then the music. So that's happening, an hour long show with 3 actors on stage, based on Hedwig. And then the virtual reality stuff / metaverse is I'm doing an event in March, which is kind of like a TED Talk with music, and some animations are kind of, I have to work on it because it's the first iteration. I'm just going to do it. I'm like, you know what? Let me just put myself out there. And that's kind of an event in March where I'll just be talking about, it'll be kind of like 2 or 3 different stories of things that patients that we've all seen, right? Knee pain, severe knee pain, and it was their hip or their core or something like that. So I'm trying to figure out the stories and the music and all that stuff. And so that's like the first iteration. The eventual iteration is like to have a whole concert, like lights flashing and this animated Titan that you saw on LinkedIn, being animated in front of you in large. So that's kind of like the ultimate kind of goal, is like a virtual reality metaverse concert Broadway show in the metaverse. And then there's a little bit of gaming that I'm getting into. So like the game, it's like the sandbox right now because it's simple and I can kind of create in it, where that's more educational, where like I have these big titans, Minecraft style titans, and you have to kind of beat them by hitting a body part. So quad, and if you don't have them in the quad, you lose. They're going to eat you up. And it's like based on Attack on Titan. I think people are kind of referring to it like that, the anime. And so those are the kind of the pillars in the podcast. The podcast, I have kind of like 2 more actresses, 2 different stories, uh, three other ones. So episode 2 is in post production, so that'll be released as soon as my editor is done with it. And then episode 3, 4, and 3 is developed and about to be written, and 4 and 5 were just about like finished development. Development means like, well, what are we going to talk about? Or what's the character? What's the situation? What's the body part? That's the development. And once we have all that, then I can write the script and then move on.
Well, how long does it take to get everything done? I mean, you have varying videos, various things and projects you're doing. For the skits, how long does it take? And then with production and everything, and then moving on to the theater stuff, I guess it's got to take months, I'm assuming.
It depends. So for example, like, the musical, looking for a venue, I got a venue for free. It was in the neighborhood. And then at that point I kind of hit the pedal. I found someone who was a writing consultant, and I found my guitarist, who's the guitarist on Wicked on Broadway currently. And I was like, I can't believe we met. He's like, oh, he's excited too because he's gonna get to perform and like do solos and have a character. He's like, I've been looking for something like this. So then the show outline was done within like a week of me finding the writing consultant who's gonna be like the director before the opening. And so that, the script will be done next week, to be honest, and I'm waiting on her notes. The sketches, like for example, there's like a musical animation that I'm doing, and that one's, I found the music, and then like the lyrics like haven't come through yet, and that's been kind of a work in progress for about 2 months. But the Mission Impossible and TMJ came together within like 2 weeks.
Oh wow, okay.
And that was me working on the podcast at the same time. So it's like this weird like horse race, like 6 horses. One kind of gets in front of the other, but then one gets to the finish line first, and there's like 2 other ones behind, and this one gets. So I'm kind of, it's like a revolving kind of thing that happens. And the animation for Dear Basketball, the handwritten drawn animation, I did the voiceover last night. I wrote it, did the voiceover last night, sent it to the animator, all within an hour. And then I was like, think about it. And then sent me back. He's like, these are my ideas. And I was like, that's exactly what I was thinking. I'd send him like the images in the sheet with like the actual anatomy, the names, and then the exercises. That took about half an hour. I sent it to him. So there's times that things can take me, 6 hours, 2 hours, or a whole year. Like the musical was 2 years. I just had like something happen in my life that I found out. A personal thing is my dad died when I was 12 of diabetes, so I thought. And even as a kid, I knew something was missing. I grew up and I was like, I had my issues and stuff like that in my 30s and early or late 20s, early 30s. And then just 2 months ago, my mom told me the truth that he actually had AIDS and he passed away as a result of a fall in the nursing home. And the diabetes didn't let him recover, and the AIDS didn't help him either. And so, like, there was all these things that kind of came together that I was able to write the musical.
Wow.
And I kind of believe that because it was like this closed door that I couldn't write the musical because something was missing. And the reason was, I know it was like kind of like COVID right now. It's like we're PTs. I have friends who are PTs treating long COVID. And, there's conditions that that are unpreventable. And I think I was missing that in all my content. I was like, what happens if you have MS? Well, we can help too. We can make your life a little bit better quality, even if it's, if it's terminal. If you're on cancer and chemo, Sloan Kettering does a lot of stuff: acupuncture, massage, physical therapy, exercise, meditation, all that stuff. And so I think that was like the missing piece that I wasn't really addressing things like, in the future I was thinking about, amputations will be there, wheelchair stuff will be for sure. But I think I was missing out on that piece of the puzzle, and it was too personal. Like, it was crazy. Like, what are the odds that I'm 37, 3 weeks later, my mom's like, yeah, your dad had AIDS, and I wasn't ready to tell you until you were mature enough for whatever her reason was. And I was like, thank you. And I was like crying, and I was a mess. And she's like, oh my gosh, what that? I was like, no, you just opened up my life. Like, now I can do stuff. And it happened. It sounds weird, but like all these messages came in, got job offers, gross anatomy's getting traction. I'm doing all this content, and it's been so. Those are kind of things again, like so to answer your question was like, sometimes there's things in my life that happen that I'm like, I can write this really fast overnight. The song lyrics, a lot of times I can write that in like 2 hours, or overnight I can't sleep and I'm just doing stuff, which my sleep behavior is pretty good these days. But at one point it was pretty rough. So, and it could be like I'm on the subway going somewhere and I just hear a song on Spotify and I'm just zoning out, like, oh, I got it. And I'll take my phone, I write all the song down. 10 minutes, later I'm done. But there's the off time, like where you meditate, right? Your brain kind of recharges and it's doing some work in the background sometimes. And all of a sudden just kind of pumps up. And it's also like other people, like, are the actors have time? Do the actors want to do it? Can the actors do it? I'm talking with one of my actors for the musical and she feels uncomfortable singing. She has a beautiful voice. If you listen to On a Date with TMJ, that was her a cappella. I'm like, how are you nervous about singing in a music? You're a musical theater person. You're a union. And everybody has their holdups. Like, I totally understand. Like, if you told me, hey, record a video about back pain like this, like, I'd be awkward. I'd be like, yeah, so so
The lumbar
what you
spine.
want to do, yeah, lumbar spine. So, and that was kind of also one of the reasons where it was like I felt like I remember like being on a local TV show talking about ACLs, and I was all had a nice sweater on and tie on, and I was like, the lights came on, recording. I was like, oh, I don't want to be here. Like, I wanted to do that. Like, I wanted to be Sanjay Gupta, and I realized like, no, I want to perform. I want to be a character, and I just thrive being a character than being myself. To be honest, when I'm like kind of teaching on video, and so that's why for me, like the vehicle for me is being a character and creating characters. But doesn't mean that it's fake. It just means that like I just like acting and I enjoy it and being a performer. But it varies the time frame. But it really doesn't. If someone was like, hey, here's 2K, let's do a 1 minute video, tomorrow, I could write that in the heartbeat. I get the actors, like that doesn't take time. So sometimes there's extraneous factors and there's intrinsic factors that either push me really quick to create content, or to be like, oh, you know what, something's missing, let me just wait, let me hold off on it, and then it just comes out of nowhere and I'm like off to the races. So
Well,
it definitely varies, but I have about, like, right now I have about 10 different projects that I'm working on.
Well, I think it's insightful for people who are maybe thinking, maybe they're in the PT space or in medicine or any other medical space, and they have this, they don't want to be that provider who walks up and just is, doing the thing that they're doing. Like they have this other thing inherently inside of them that they want to do, and they want to get out there and be more themselves. And did you?
Mhm.
It sounds like you kind of had a little bit of an issue, not an issue, but maybe there was a point in time where you, like you said, you wanted to quit. You wanted to. Perhaps this isn't something that you wanted to do. Did taking all that action help you to continue to move forward? Or was it perhaps just this inherent, like there's these little signs that keep popping up that indicate like this is something, there's like traction to this?
I watch like a lot of Tyler Perry because that's kind of like my vision is to be the Tyler Perry for health and bilingual. And so, and he and even other producers and like filmmakers, I just hear maybe musicians too, but um, it's like you want to stop, but you can't. It's like a disease, and so maybe there were signals, but it was just like it's just deep inside. Like it's just nothing I can tell you about. Like I kind of think about. I try to analyze myself now more so than ever as I'm kind of writing with other writers and trying. It's like kind of therapeutic. Because I write everything myself, and so sometimes it's nice to collaborate and hear other people who are. That's what they do. When you wear a lot of hats, you can kind of miss out on a couple of details here and there. So, anyways, as a kid, I grew up in the hood. Couldn't go outside and play. It was too dangerous. My parents didn't let me. And so I watched a lot of TV. I watched a lot of novelas and the Spanish news, which is like pretty much like a freaking crazy show. I watched a lot of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Family Matters, Mr. Rogers, obviously, Dragon Ball Z. And so, television was kind of like this, like, I'll never be there, but I can aspire to one day be on television or do that, And so I think there was something deep down in that, being, kind of imprisoned in my own home, not being able to kind of go out and play like other kids and or do other things or travel teams and stuff like that. So I think there was like that part, but I think there was just like this intrinsic drive to help people and to make people laugh because I grew up in a very, my home was nice. My home was like very loving. My dad was very supportive until he got sick. And then, the whole thing, you do whatever you want to do type of thing. But outside was dangerous as hell. Like every day coming home from school from the subway was like, am I going to survive 4 blocks? Like that was to the extent. And I was small and skinny and, didn't have many friends because I wasn't allowed to go outside. Like one friend. So like usually it's like, you get into a fight, you brought your 2 friends and they brought their 4 friends, you brought their 6 friends. I would have been done after like 1 friend. So it was like, that was kind of but it was like really life or death. Like it was fearful for me almost daily. So I think part of that was kind of like, well, you don't want other people to feel the same way. I lost my dad really young. I don't want somebody else to not be able to take care of their own bodies. So I think those are the things that intrinsically were kind of are pushing me and are pushing me. And now it's just kind of like the feedback I get, like random person on LinkedIn was like, I love you. Yeah, I love your scene with your mother and you. It reminds me of me and my mom. Thank you so
Hmm.
much. Keep doing it. Like those little things. Um, but it doesn't negate when you're like, oh shoot, how do I pay my next student loan bill and how do I make money? Like, where's my next gig coming from? Is this really like worth it? Like I'm, you know, hiring people here and there, but is it really going anywhere? So yeah, so those are things that really kind of are setbacks. But I think, when you grow up in the adversity, I think many of us have more adversity than we think. You get stronger and bolder, and it's like, oh, you're trying to combine media and education. Good luck. And I'm like, yeah, I grew up in this neighborhood. Go
Right.
go walk down this
Good
neighborhood
luck.
in
Yeah.
1990. This is where Giuliani became famous, pretty much. He parked his car 2 blocks away and caught people buying crack and cocaine down like across the street. That's where he was. I learned that later on when he was on Letterman. He was like, he told like the street that I was like, wait, that's my street. And so I was like, oh, look at that.
Well, sweet.
So when you can overcome that type of environment growing up, just getting to PT school is freaking hard, like intimidating times. But to be told you can't do something, it's like, well, I survived this lifestyle. Like I think I can figure it out at some point. It'll hurt along the way, but I'm okay doing that.
Well, I think that fight scene with a kid being like friends, and then you turn around, there's no one there. That might be a new skit idea. I think
Hmm.
that would be really, really funny.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. So one of the parts is like, so my buddy, he's a he's an actor. He's the guy in Mission Impossible. So Hasiem, and so I haven't even talked about this yet, but it's like there's one because Yeah, he's from the South actually, and so I kind of have one of us being kind of like thugs, like yo, what's up, like pound each other and like exchange like something, and instead of it being like cocaine, it's like actually sugar or something like organic sugar,
Right.
but it's I think it was like a Dave Chappelle skit where it's like the four thugs are on the corner in front of the bodega, and they're just like, yo, that chick is so smart, you know. Oh man, look, she has a good job, and so catcalling. So like, what I'm gonna do is kind of be like, we meet up in the corner, pound each other wearing like big bubble jackets and hoodies and stuff like that, and then we're like, yo, how's your knee pain? And we break out into song, like totally like West Side Story, like down the street. So, that's kind of using again our kind of like our backgrounds and doing that and making like my neighborhood kind of humorizing that kind of
Difficult
violent
time.
lifestyle and difficult time. Yeah.
Now,
Hmm.
we talked about virtual reality, and you talked
Hmm.
about balancing all the horses and stuff. Was that the easy next step for you that you saw coming, that you're like, I know I'm going to have to get into this space, and I know I'm going to have to be a creator, because it's, I mean, I think everybody can kind of feel it, and if you don't understand what it is, you have to feel like people are going to learn anyway. So I guess, was it an easy next step for you to kind of get into augmented reality and into the metaverse and so forth?
Sort of, yeah. Well, nowadays with the metaverse, yeah. So what happened was, as a PT, right? Like you learn the spine, and then you want to learn how the spine influences the pelvic girdle, and then you want to go into pelvic floor, and then you want to go into, incontinence specifically, and then you want to go into the neurological like it's like just using like all these breadcrumbs, or you like ortho or sports, like you want to treat like tactical, you want to go Navy SEAL, like there you kind of go into this like rabbit hole. Of, I want to get better and better and better, learn more. It's no different in film. For me, it was. And so, like, I learned editing on Premiere. Then I was like, oh, I want to do VFX. Let me do After Effects. And I was like, whoa, I know how to do this. Can I do 3D? Yes, I can. So I learned Blender, Unity, and Unreal Engine. And so those are kind of 3D softwares that's kind of where the metaverse is 3D. It's like you can walk around. Instead of Facebook or a landing page, social media now, it's like 2D and you have to scroll. Now you can literally walk yourself through like a video game and go to like the Nike store and they have a discount. And so when the metaverse has these to build things, like I know 3D, so I can build it, And so that's what happened. And then, but it was actually one of my buddies from CrossFit about 6 years ago. He was working for Doug Lyman, who created the Born Identity film series. He was working for his VFX company, and he introduced me to 360 film. And I was walking out of my clinic, and he showed me something he produced. And I'm walking down the street, I'm like, what the heck is this? And I hear kind of on the right side of the phone, I had my headphones on the right side, I hear like a scream. And I turned my phone, there was like someone in a hospital gown, like running away. And I was like, you just made me turn my body. And I was like, as a physical therapist, I was like, oh, I got to get into this. So I bought a camera, 360 camera, bought a GPU computer like that next week. And I started learning because what happens with like gaming computers, everything runs faster. So like if you edit this, right, and you edit the video to render it out to export it, might take you like 2 minutes. When I got my PC gaming computer, it took me 30 seconds. That's relatively speaking. So like whatever time you do right now with editing on your own, divide that by 10, and that's a speed how fast things go. And now it's even faster. That was like what 3 years ago now that I got this computer. I'm on my laptop now by my other computer. So yeah, it was kind of the next thing, and I said, well, this is a movement type of thing, VR, and that's why I got fascinated by it. And so the next step was like gaming. So I got hired by a startup creating a game for wrist fractures, and we did it. And one of the things with the CEO was like, it has to be a narrative, it has to be a story. He's like, yeah, totally. And he had 3 ACL reconstructions, and he thought PT was boring. When it made it more fun, and then he knew about me somehow, and he's like, I've never met a PT who knows all about like production and 360 and VR. And I was like, well, here I
Here
am.
we are.
And it's gotten even better since then. So yeah, so that kind of made it easy because to build things, and even if I don't build it myself, I know how to tell an animator, modeler, builder, world builder, hey, I need this and that, and this is the template, and you can give full details.
Well,
Um,
let's
yeah.
pause for a second, just because I want to make sure everyone's on the same page. So, augmented reality is maybe you describe what augmented reality is versus like the metaverse, or like how it all works together, just so people understand. Because I know,
Mm-hmm.
if you're familiar with the terms, you can go down a rabbit hole really quickly. And I'm with you. I'm more concerned for the people who may not be like, okay, what's the difference between augmented reality, maybe the metaverse?
Yeah.
How are you bringing it all together?
Yeah, so I'm not doing augmented yet, but augmented reality is kind of like Pokemon Go or, Snapchat filters or Instagram filters where you put the bunny ears on. That's augmented reality. It like overlay something. If you shop on Amazon, it says, look at your furniture in the space and you can kind of show it. with size and everything, that's augmented reality. So it kind of places an object into your space through your phone. Virtual reality is when you put a head mounted display, a big kind of thing that looks like, oh, I have it right here. So this, you put this on and you're transported to a different world. Um, so the metaverse is pretty much, it could be on a browser or it can be in virtual reality, but it's like playing World of Warcraft or Risk. You know, like you can move around in space. Right now, to go on a social media, you have to kind of sit at the computer on your phone, and you have to kind of be married to the phone. To go to a web page, you know, you type in the URL, you see it in 2D. Excuse me, in Metaverse, you can literally navigate and walk through the store and look at the objects that you want a Nike sneaker. There's a Nike sneaker. That's what it looks like, and they can make it look really realistic. And just like you might get like a template for your website, right? You have different designs for your website, podcasting website. You can also get different templates for your clothing in VR. You know, like Bitmoji. Think of Bitmoji, right? Or the 3D avatars on Facebook. You can change your hair if you really wanted to, and maybe there's a mole and you have it there. You can take it away. So now you can kind of create your own avatar and create your own persona, and it could be like the steampunk with a big hat and goggles, and that's Michael. Like that's what it could be if you wanted it to be. You can have 6 different ones. So as opposed to just having like a profile picture and you can change the profile, but it's still your face, you can change your hair, you can change your eyeglasses, you can change your boots if you wanted to. So there's a lot of freedom, and it's just a lot of different opportunities. But it's literally like you can get transported in your own room and go to a different, like a comedy show somewhere in Russia.
And your goal basically is, are you going to continue to build the shows within this metaverse, or the plan to make it entertaining within the space? Because you don't want it to be, again, this boring anatomy class that you go to in the metaverse. It's going to be this interactive, engaging, entertaining show or episode that you want people to engage in the metaverse.
Correct. Yeah. So like what I explained earlier was, so the metaverse event I'm doing in All Space VR, because there's it's built. It looks like a kind of a state, like a stage, like a theater with a stage, and like a theater with a stage. There's a projector behind me where I can put like videos or images. However, you know what I'm doing is trying to make it even more entertaining. That in itself is kind of entertaining. It's kind of cool. Furthermore, I have this big kind of titan, like a muscular figure where you can identify all the muscles, and it's gonna be like 4 times the size of me. So imagine that in front of you. You're just like, oh my gosh. And you can see the quad is the size of your body, or the calf is the size of your body, you know?
Right.
So if you don't know anything about anatomy, you can kind of actually literally see it and like be like, oh wow, I didn't know the calf went up to the knee. I didn't realize it went above the knee, you know, or I didn't realize that, you know, the gluteus maximus was that far to my side, you know. So people can actually, oh wow, there's that many tendons in my ankle. I had no idea. Mm-hmm. And they go up to close to my knee. So that's kind of the spectacle of it, right? And then kind of furthermore, it's going to be all entertainment. So whether you're at a gallery and things are moving and there's that anatomy titans like fighting each other, you know, and silly and comedy, or whether you're playing a game, like literally have that sword and you're fighting the titan, and that's a game. So you're in med school and you're in gross anatomy 101, and you're trying to learn, hey, go into gross anatomy 3.0, you know, actually it's called Titans of Anatomy. There's a name. I put a poll out. So that's Titans of Anatomy. I should call it what it is. Titans of Anatomy, you have a sword, you're running around and you're trying to dodge a giant and you hit him in the quad, and you die. You're like, wait, it was the Achilles, no pun intended. Hit the Achilles, you win. And then you level up to get a gun, and then a better gun, and the more detail, and you hit the sciatic nerve, you know. So that's where I don't want you to feel like you have to sit in front of a textbook, because that's what I did, right? The muscle cards and the textbooks, and just sit there and just memorize and walk around and on the treadmill just trying to memorize. So what if you can actually be interactive with, like, you know, when your sword cuts across, you know, the striations of the gastrocnemius are, you know, medial lateral or whatever it is, you have to slice in that direction. You learn more, you know, you kind of connect that better. So those are kind of the things that I'm building in the metaverse, gaming and entertainment.
Well, I love that you're bringing gamification in there because one, I play video games as a kid, so I'm all
Mm-hmm.
about. I'm ready for this to happen. But
Oh.
second, do you see universities or other people doing this at all? I mean, it's something I know everyone's kind of dipping their toe into that idea, and I've seen some uh, almost like visuals where they'll pop up what's the word I'm looking for? It'll come up and it'll be like a virtual heart that you can see. It's not in like the metaverse, but it's just
Yep.
like a display rather.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of
Like a
medical school,
hologrammy kind of
hologram.
thing.
That's the word I
Yeah.
was looking
Mm-hmm.
for. Yeah. So medical schools have been using
Mm-hmm.
holograms and other ways to teach students. Have you seen big institutions start to enact stuff like this, or is this still new?
Yeah, I think one of the softwares I use is 3D for medical. I love that app, and I'm like, please use me. Let me
Right,
do
right.
content for you. And so, last year I did a little hologram thing. Like I walked around the 3D for medical anatomy figure in my living room, and I put it on LinkedIn. If you scroll back to 2020, maybe like January 2021, it's there. But yeah, and that was for a while. Like when I was getting there was like one example, and I was doing 360 video of like there was a kidney in like the floor of the lobby, and there was a student walking around the kidney, and so that's happening. I think 3D Formatic already has a virtual reality kind of augmented reality thing where they can kind of remove the pieces and look down. But again, like that's education. That's kind of dry, and that's okay. But I
Mm,
want to make it like that sucker gets up and starts chasing you down the street, and the only way to stop him is like to shoot him in the patella,
right.
so, or, like maybe the action, you have to kind of recharge by using your bicep, and I don't know. So those are all things like, one day I'll have collaborators and maybe people who are really in the gaming world that can kind of help me. But yeah, video games like that I didn't think that, the only place I did not want to be in or didn't think I'd be in video games. So when I got hired by Reactive, I was surprised and I was like, you know what? Let me open myself up to this. And I'm like, oh, this could be fun because like
Mm,
my video games were like FIFA Soccer, and they still are. That's why I don't have a console because I'd be glued to it. FIFA Soccer, Gran Turismo, any driving racing games, and then the fighting games. Like
mm.
Marvel vs. Capcoms and the Tekken's, Mortal Kombat's, and everything else after that. Um, so those kind of were but they were all story. There's always a story. You're trying to get to the World Cup. You're trying to get the Subaru souped up. You're trying to beat, M. Bison. So like it doesn't. There's always a narrative to it, and that's where I was like, oh, I can tell stories. Let me just do it in a game. There's a virtual reality game that was a dedicated virtual reality game called Dizzy Birds for vestibular disorders, and that was you were going to navigate and find an eagle comes down and swoops up your mom, and you're like this cartoon bird. There's a sample on LinkedIn again, and then you have to use your head to kind of navigate the bird, and it's cervical proprioception. So instead of the laser on your forehead,
Right.
you just do the game and you control your neck and you kind of guide the bird smoothly. So that was kind of that's a prototype I could put that on the shelf just because that I need developers and designers and a little bit more to get that one completed. But again, because of the skills that I've kind of developed, that to production is pretty quick. It's just the caliber is a little bit higher up, and it's not my priority.
Well,
So
have you
that's
ever played
also.
Mortal Kombat?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the menu, like as soon as you started saying like fighting games, I was like, man, when they do the finishers, I'm like, you can
Mm-hmm.
see so detailed all
Yeah.
the anatomy and all the different things that they're breaking or destroying or
Yeah.
whatever. But
Exactly.
if I did that as a class instead of gross anatomy, I think I would have been learned a little bit more, maybe done a
I
little bit
know.
better.
Right. 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 It's like what if
What
only
if?
if.
I
Yeah.
know. Well, you kind of described already what's next for you. I guess like maybe you can give us an interpretation of where do you think the future of healthcare entertainment is going? Like, what is it going to be adopted fast? Is this going to be something that's happening soon? You think it's going to take a little bit of time? What do you think?
Yeah, I was just talking to somebody today saying that it's happening now. Like people are starting to adopt it. And he's like, you're at the forefront of it. And like, brands are going to come asking you to do stuff. And I'm like, oh, I'm getting a little traction, but I think I have a little bit more to go. But I think it's always been there. It's just people kind of always assumed it was just a movie or a TV
Mm,
show. And I'm like,
right.
no, they were talking about voting and social justice and racism and, incarceration and health. And like, we just didn't pick up on it, but you kind of did. And so I'm trying to go a step beyond and that was implicit. I want to be explicit with it. And I think that maybe that's the difference that it didn't change behaviors in society. But yeah, I kind of see myself, I don't necessarily, it's hard to like, I've had people tell me like, oh, you should get a brand on your show, like an ultrasound machine. I'm like, I don't really want to do that. You could, I can see your face.
Oh yeah.
But like, And then it's like, but you can get money. I was like, you know what? I don't want to do that. But it was like, like Reebok or Noble or, some other company. Of course, I would consider that. But really, like, I think this is kind of like, it's my baby in the fact that like, I think it can have its own legs. And either companies will come out and be like, can you do this for us? That's something that I would consider. And even talking to universities, it's kind of where I'm at right now. It's like, well, how can I help you? Um, and that's just one area that I can go into is still do the same gross anatomy content as short sketches, but now it's like matched up to a curriculum in education. So that's kind of the next thing that where I'm looking at, and I have somebody interested in kind of helping me out, being an investor, to help kind of push that forward faster. But yeah, I kind of want it to be kind of self-sustaining, and don't get me wrong, like I can kind of create for other companies content based on what I've done with gross anatomy, which is kind of create a narrative with the education part and how the body works, and then give it to whatever company asks for. But yeah, I kind of wanted. I do. I think this year was like, you know what, this has legs. Like this can be self-sustained. I don't need to get Nike on board. I don't
Not yet,
necessarily
right?
need that. Not yet, if
Yeah.
ever. Like, so those are kind of the things where I'm just like trying to contemplate. And yeah, of course I want to collaborate one day. Like I want to kind of do fun stuff for other different, filmmakers or platforms or games or industries. So, but it's all the same thing. It's like if you notice, did you listen to the podcast at all?
I haven't yet. No, I was looking. I watched all your videos on YouTube and everything else, but
Yeah, the
I
podcast is
didn't.
also on YouTube. So I did it
Oh, is
so
that
there's
okay?
subtitles, people can read it, but that's on Spotify as well. And so the podcast is the same thing. It's just a little bit different in that it's like I call you in to ask about my neck pain, and yet I'm a crazy character and I'm distracted by my dog barking. So it's the same kind of format in the
Mm.
formula. But it's a little bit different audience, maybe. That's for more like a working adult type of thing. But someone in their teen years might be like, "Oh, that's my mom. That sounds like my mom. It's hilarious." Or that sounds like I work at the ice cream shop. Sounds like my boss. So, it can kind of transcend generations. That was also a challenging part. Was how do I transcend generations and can make it a family show, or get the most people as possible. Which is ambitious. And everybody's like, "Oh, you have to niche down, niche down." I'm like, well, the body is my niche. That's what it is.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for people to learn more about it, and it's certainly been great for you explaining everything. And everybody should go to your website. It's Gross Anatomy. Is it grossanatomystudios.com or grossanatomy.studio?
Nope, it's grossanatomy.media.
Media, that's what it was. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And well, we're winding down to the end here, and I really appreciate you coming on and explaining everything and all the projects that you've been doing. There's one more portion here at the podcast that I like to do with everyone. It's called the Health Me to Health You portion of the podcast. First question I ask everyone: if you had the attention of everyone in the world for 30 seconds, what would you say?
When I heard your podcast, I knew what to say, and now I'm like, it's like, oh, I know what I'd say.
Yeah.
Say the question again.
If you had the attention of everyone in the world for 30 seconds, what would you say?
Be good to each other. Yeah, because I feel like that's kind of if you're suffering, just be good. You're gonna want to do something for them. If someone needs some financial assistance, be good. Just I think it kind of everything else kind of follows after that. So if you have that kind of intuition, and that's what I kind of hope is like I'm trying to help people. Really, it's fun. I love what I do, but I think, and then when I have other people, I'm like, let me know how I can help you. Like, what's your vision? What's your story? What's your passion? And how can I help you kind of achieve that? We talk about health and, this gross anatomy thing, but if I can kind of create, an empire, I can create housing, and jobs and put food on people's tables and give education. And so that's kind of the goals. So if anybody, even I talk to other clinicians, like, you know, how do I find a good, you can tell like they want to do good. They want to do the best. And so just be good. Yeah.
Do you recommend physical therapists get into augmented reality and metaverse? And if so, I guess where can people get started?
YouTube. I would say, yeah. Well, actually submitted to the PPS section to talk about my journey in the metaverse. So hopefully I'll be able to kind of show people myself but I would say, yeah, it's a next, listen, back in the day, it was like, if you didn't have a website, you were doomed. If you didn't have a social media, you were doomed. Now, if you
Yep.
don't have metaverse, you're going to be doomed. And it's like starting right now. So if you're one of the first ones in, you're going to kill it. And so, I'm going in a different angle versus clinically, but I can see like I might be talking to someone about how to create clinical applications to the metaverse, but I'm going a little bit different route. But I'm happy to kind of like say, hey, get into it, figure it out. Clinical, I can tell you how it's going to work out, and we can chat. But yes, get into the metaverse now.
And we went over your website. Where else can people find you and or connect with you if they're interested in working with you or want to learn more from you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Adrian Miranda. So linkedin.com/in/, Adrian MPT. Gross Anatomy Studios on Instagram. I don't do Twitter as much anymore. It's Adrian MPT. Facebook, Adrian Miranda. I think it's facebook.com/Adrian MPT. And then my email, amiranda84@gmail.com. Feel free to use it. And where else? I think that's pretty much it. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Barely use Twitter.
It's all right. All the links will be
That's
in the
pretty good.
bio
And
anyway. So if you need to find
Gross
them, you'll find
Anatomy
them there.
and grossanatomy.media. That's where all of my content's hosted. If you want to reach out to me, you can contact me through there, and you can see all the other projects I'm working on there as well. And it's going to continue growing as well.
Adrian, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.